In war, the official histories are written in black and white: victory and defeat, life and death, hero and villain. But for the soldiers on the ground, the reality is 1,000 shades of gray. It's a world of impossible choices made in a fraction of a second, where the line between a medal and a court-martial is razor-thin. Some stories get buried, not because they don't matter, but because they're too complicated, too uncomfortable. There are stories about good soldiers and bad outcomes. The story you're about to hear is an archetype of this tragic reality. While the names and specific details have been composited from real-world events, after-action reports and anonymous interviews, the situation is tragically common. It centers on a man the Army considered one of its finest, a decorated tank commander who, in a single moment, lost it all. The official record tells one story. But the men who were there, who breathed the dust and felt the heat, they tell another. On paper, he was a hero, a decorated veteran with a flawless record. But in the chaos of battle, one decision turned his tank into a tomb and his legacy to dust. This is the story of how a single, split-second mistake made a hero the scapegoat. For a military disaster, the hero and the beast to understand the fall, you first have to get the man and the machine. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thorne was what the Army calls a lifer. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a tanker, born and bred. By the mid-2000s, at the height of the Iraq insurgency, Thorne had already proven he was a calm, capable leader. He'd earned his stripes in the unforgiving desert, a place where the enemy wasn't some uniformed army, but a ghost who planted bombs in the dead of night. Thorne commanded an M1A2 Abrams, a 68-ton monster of steel and depleted uranium armor. His crew called their tank Ironclad, and for good reason. The Abrams was designed to hunt other tanks, a Cold War beast repurposed for a new kind of war. But on the streets of Iraq, its greatest strength, its raw power, was also its biggest weakness. The main gun could level a building, but the real threat wasn't something you could see. It was the improvised explosive device, the IED, the insurgents' favorite weapon. These homemade bombs, cooked up from old artillery shells, could be hidden anywhere, a pile of trash, an animal carcass, or just buried under the road. Ironclad was a small world of its own, a complex system where every single part had a job. An Abrams tank runs on a 4-person crew, a team that has to move and think like one person. First, you have the driver, tucked in the front of the hull, steering the beast through chaos. Then there's the gunner in the turret, whose entire world is putting the 120mm main gun on target. Next to him, the loader muscling 40-pound rounds into the cannon's breech. And then there was Thorne, the tank commander. From his seat up top, he was the eyes, ears, and brain of the whole operation. Everything the tank and its crew did or failed to do was on him. It was his job to read the battlefield, talk to other units, and make the life-or-death calls. And in the murky warfare of Iraq, those calls were never simple. The enemy didn't wear a uniform. A friendly face could be a spotter, a civilian car could be a bomb on wheels. The psychological weight of this constant threat was massive. Studies have shown that just being exposed to IEDs is a major factor in developing post-traumatic stress, even for those who are never physically hit. Every soldier, especially those in armored vehicles, lived with a constant, gnawing tension. The fear wasn't just about getting hit, but about making a mistake. If you hesitate, your crew could die. If you act too fast, you could kill an innocent family. This was the crushing weight that commanders like Marcus Thorne carried on their shoulders every single day. The mission that would define and ultimately destroy Thorne's career was called Operation Ghost Viper. On paper, the objective was simple: secure a key road in a volatile province south of Baghdad. This highway, known to coalition forces as Route Irish, was a critical supply line, but it was also a hunting ground. Insurgents used it to move weapons, set up ambush, and plant IEDs that were getting deadlier by the day. The insurgents' tactics were getting smarter. They'd moved on from simple roadside bombs to vehicle-borne IEDs or VBIEDs, cars packed with hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds of explosives. A VBIED wasn't just a bomb. It was a poor man's guided missile, and psychologically it was devastating. It turned every single car on the road into a potential threat. The standard operating procedure, or SOP, for a suspected VBIED was crystal clear, drilled into every soldier: stop all traffic, set up a perimeter, and call the bomb squad. You don't approach it. You don't shoot unless you see a clear hostile act. You wait. But waiting is a luxury you rarely get on the battlefield. Command wanted results. They wanted routes cleared, and they wanted it done yesterday. The pressure to keep moving to get the mission done was always there, pushing against the caution in the rulebook. On that morning, Thorne's platoon of 4 Abrams tanks rolled down Route Irish. The air was thick with heat and a fine dust. That got into everything. They were already behind schedule. A sandstorm had pushed back their start time, and command was on the radio, pushing them to make up for it. Over the comms, Thorne's voice was calm, the same steady baritone his crew trusted, but inside he felt that old mix of adrenaline and anxiety. You could feel the tension rising. The road was quiet. Too quiet. The usual mess of beat-up sedans and overloaded trucks had just vanished. For a veteran like Thorne, an empty road was way scarier than a crowded one. It meant the locals knew something he didn't. Classic sign of an ambush. He radioed his concerns up the chain. The answer came back, short and impersonal. Press on, Ironclad 1. The mission is time-sensitive. Through his thermal sights, Thorne scanned the horizon. He saw heat signatures where they shouldn't be, flickering signs of life in abandoned buildings overlooking the road. His gunner, a young corporal on his first tour, called it out. PC, I got 2 individuals, rooftop east side. No weapons visible. But they're watching us. Thorne logged it in his head, his mind a map of threats. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle he had to solve right now. The pressure from command, the eerie silence, the spotters on the roof, it was all building to something. The air in the tank felt thick with unspoken fear. Every man in that crew knew they were rolling into a trap. The only question was when it would spring. The moment arrived, the way it often does in war, not with a huge explosion, but with a simple, ordinary sight. A beat-up blue pickup truck. It pulled out from a side road about 1,000 meters ahead, turned onto Route Irish, and started driving right toward them. Any other day, any other place, it would have been nothing. But here, on this road, today, it was everything. Got a vehicle. 12 o'clock, closing, the driver reported, his voice tight. Thorne zeroed in with his sights. The truck was old and listed to one side, like it was carrying something heavy in the back. It wasn't speeding, but it wasn't stopping either. It just kept coming, steady, deliberate. Talk to me, people, what are we seeing? Thorne asked his crew, his voice a low command in their headsets. Looks like a civilian truck, PC, the gunner replied. Single occupant male. Can't make out much more. The SOP was screaming in Thorne's head. Halt, cordon, call EOD, but so was his commander's voice. Press on, time sensitive, he got on the radio to his platoon. All ironclad elements, be advised, suspicious vehicle approaching our lead. Stand by. The blue truck was now 800 meters away. And it was still coming. This is the fog of war. It's a storm of bad information, intense pressure, and crippling doubt. Thorne had seconds to make a choice. Was this a farmer heading to market, just confused and scared by 4 massive tanks? Or was this a suicide bomber, his hand hovering over a trigger, the bed of his truck packed with enough explosives to vaporize Ironclad and its crew? Thorne tried to hail the vehicle. They used the loudspeaker, flashed their lights, and even fired warning shots, all standard procedure. But the truck didn't slow down. It didn't swerve. It just kept coming, 600 meters. He's not stopping, PC, the driver said, his voice now a strained whisper. All the pieces clicked into a horrifying picture in Thorne's mind. The empty road, the spotters, the pressure to clear the route, and now this. A lone truck, acting weird, ignoring warnings, weighed down in the back. It was a perfect match for a VBIED. A wave of protectiveness washed over him for his men, for the platoon behind him. If that truck was a bomb and it got in the middle of his formation, it would be a massacre. 500 meters. This was it. The point of no return. The kill radius of a big VBIED could be hundreds of meters. Waiting any longer was a gamble he wasn't willing to take. He had to choose between breaking the rules of engagement for what he thought was there and the catastrophic failure he could. 'Cause if he was wrong— "Gunner," Thorne said, his voice colder and harder than he'd ever heard it. "Identify target." "Blue pickup truck?" There was a half-second of silence. The gunner knew exactly what that meant. "PC, are we clear?" "I don't see a weapon." "He is the weapon," Thorne snapped back, the pressure finally cracking his famous calm. "Engage," the order was given. The gunner hesitated for a split second, his own mind racing before training took over. He centered the crosshairs. And in that instant, a career, a reputation, and several lives all came down to a single point. The main gun of the Abrams roared, a deafening blast that shook the earth. The high explosive round crossed 400 meters in less than a second. The blue truck didn't just explode, it vanished. A flash of orange and black, and then nothing, just a smoking crater on the asphalt. For a moment there was just a heavy, ringing silence in Thorne's tank. It was filled with the weight of a decision that could never be taken back. Then a new voice crackled over the radio. Not the enemy. It was the commander of an infantry unit that was supposed to be moving up behind them, a unit Thorne didn't even know was that close. His voice was choked with panic and fury. "Ironclad 1, cease fire, cease fire, that was our asset. That was our informant." In a split second, Thorne's world fell apart. The blue pickup wasn't a VBIED, it was carrying a high-value Iraqi informant, a man giving critical intelligence to a different coalition unit. He was on his way to a secure location for a debriefing. The mission was so secret, Thorne's unit hadn't been told. The informant's instructions were simple: don't stop for anyone, drive straight to your destination. He was following his orders. And Thorne, following his training and his gut, had just killed him. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The infantry unit was livid, convinced they'd been hit by friendly fire. Thorne's platoon was in shock, trying to process what just happened. The truck was obliterated. There was nothing left to recover. Operation Ghost Viper was over. Thorne's platoon was sent back to base, their tank impounded like a crime scene. The investigation started before the barrel of Ironclad's gun was even cold. It came in the form of an Army Regulation 15-6 investigation. An AR 15-6 is a formal inquiry commanders use to get the facts of an incident. It's not a criminal trial, but its findings can absolutely end a career or kickstart a court-martial. Thorne told his side of the story. He laid out the pressure from command, the intel about the VBIED threat, the truck's bizarre behavior, the rooftop spotters, and the fact that it ignored all warnings. He argued that, with the information he had and the seconds he had to act, he made a reasonable choice to protect his men. But the investigation painted a very different picture. The official report zeroed in on Thorne's violation of the rules of engagement. It hammered the fact that he fired on a vehicle that didn't show a clear hostile act. The rooftop spotters? Inconclusive, the pressure from his own command? Downplayed as just standard operational tempo. The most damning evidence was the lack of a secondary explosion. A VBIED of the size Thorne feared would have set off a massive secondary blast from its own explosives. Since there wasn't one, investigators concluded there was never a bomb. The final report was a cold clinical breakdown of a tragedy. It concluded that Staff Sergeant Thorne made a catastrophic error in judgment that led to the death of a critical coalition asset. It recommended he be relieved of his command and face punishment. The news ripped through the ranks. Staff Sergeant Thorne, the hero, the rock-solid tanker, was now the guy who fired on a friendly. He became a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when a good soldier gets it wrong. His crew was broken up and scattered to other units. His name was Mud. The impossible complexity of his decision, the fog of war, the conflicting orders, the bad intel was all smoothed over into one simple, damning story. It was his fault. His career was finished. He was demoted, stuck behind a desk shuffling papers until he could quietly retire. The military, as an institution, needed someone to blame. The failure was too big, the loss of the informant too great. It was easier to sacrifice one NCO's career than to admit to the systemic failures that set the stage for disaster, the poor communication between units, the insane pressure on junior leaders, and the impossible nature of the war itself. Marcus Thorne became the scapegoat. The story of Marcus Thorne isn't unique. It's a pattern that has played out in war after war. And it forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. What's the real difference between a hero and a villain? When the enemy is invisible and the rules are written in shades of gray? Thorne was a product of his training. The army had sharpened his instincts, celebrated his decisiveness, and rewarded his aggression. Then, in one impossible moment, those same exact traits caused his downfall. He was staring at two horrible outcomes: risk killing an innocent person or risk getting his entire crew blown to pieces. He chose to protect his men, a decision any leader in his boots would be tempted to make. So, was he truly to blame? Or was he a victim of the chaos he was forced to operate in? Was it his single mistake, or was it a chain reaction of failures? Of intelligence, communication, and command that all came crashing down on his tank on that lonely stretch of road? The official record has its answer. But the truth, as it so often is in war, is a lot messier. It's a story about the crushing burden of command, the paper-thin line between duty and disaster, and how big institutions protect themselves by finding one person to carry the weight of a collective failure. The final casualty of Operation Ghost. Viper wasn't the informant in the blue truck. It was the reputation of a good soldier who had to make an impossible choice in a war that had no easy answers. The fog of war is filled with stories like this, where the lines are blurred and the stakes are absolute. If you think it's important to explore these complex military histories, hit that subscribe button for more declassified stories and deep dives, and let us know in the comments, was Thorne a scapegoat or was he rightfully held responsible? We read every single one. Thanks for watching.